So you have this switch box in the middle, this universal translator kind of thing that allows you to ingest multiple signals, standardize them, and output them in either OpenTelemetry or some others, which gives you some flexibility for transition periods or maybe some other reasons in your architecture and landscape that you need to support more than just OpenTelemetry. So I think that's extremely powerful in terms of, where we're moving into this age where we need observable applications. And this will definitely be like smoothing the experience and the transition.
Hey there, welcome to Bad Talks, the podcast. I'm Rick.
And I am Oscar.
And today we are joined by Alex Thissen, who is a cloud architect at Xebia. Welcome, Alex.
Welcome.
Hello, Oscar. Hello, Rick. It's nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, it's so great to have you on because, I hope you don't take this the wrong way, right? But I've been in the industry for a couple of years now.
Here we go. We're old.
No. But even in the beginning of, in the first part of my career when I wasn't active at all, I think Alex was already a very visible person in the, at least at that time, .NET community in the Netherlands. And if I look at your LinkedIn, it says that you've been, I think, an MVP since 2007. So
yes.
That's quite an impressive time to be so active in the community. So my question would be, how? I mean, it takes a lot of time, right? So what drives you to keep investing in the community still?
All right. I think that the formula of doing this is passion and enthusiasm. I really find it nice and enjoyable to learn new things, but then the next step to teach other people or to tell other people about it and share everything that you know, so passing it on, which makes it fairly easy, right? You get a lot of energy from attending conferences or meetups or moments like this, where you can share things and you get some ideas back, you get some feedback and other insights, which you can then use to do it again in the next moment you meet someone. And it's sometimes a one-on-one meeting, sometimes it's with a few people or a lot of people, but that's what gives me a lot of energy, I think, and that's where my passion is, teaching others, doing cool stuff.
I think that's really good. If people have that passion, it's also really nice to see if those kind of people are up on stage, because you can almost feel the energy coming from them and trying to make you enthusiastic about a certain way or a certain service or whatever. I'm also not entirely sure if that's something that's seen across multiple types of industries, where we all try and improve each other and ourselves by learning from each other. I think that's a very nice way of looking at improving an industry in itself.
Yeah, especially an industry that's growing and maturing as fast as ours. There's always something new to learn, right? Every month there's new frameworks, runtimes, languages. So it never stops. And I think that we have a very kind and inclusive community, a young one, but with great people that are in it for the same thing. They all need to learn. So I think that if it's a give and take of learning and passing it on, then everybody benefits and we all get better. So I noticed that, and that's why I also like it as much, because people are really willing to engage, to learn, to listen, and to give ideas and opinions. So good, and I think it's also fairly easy to do it because we're very digital. Whereas some other industries, it might not be as easy to convey your knowledge in a certain form, but we've got plenty of opportunity and means to do so.
Yeah, we have lots of technologies to specialize in and get up on stage and share that. And the nice thing about, I think, speaking or writing or anything like that is the biggest benefit you have yourself, because you go in much deeper than you would do normally, because you really have almost a customer of your problem. And I think by teaching, you will learn so much more than by just understanding technology or anything.
Yeah, fair enough, fair enough. So, unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend Techorama this year, but I know somebody who's across the table from me who has. And there was this session about, what was the topic, Oscar?
Well, I actually attended one of Alex's sessions, and it was about dev containers. And for a while now, and years ago, I did a session with you, Rick, internally somewhere about GitHub code spaces, yeah. And which is basically the idea as well. But still, in practice, I've never got to the point of the team I'm working with to move over to dev containers. While I definitely saw the benefit, do it from some home projects. And so it's like, let's go and drag some people into Alex's talk. So,
well, thanks for that.
That was kind of full, right?
Appreciate it. Yeah, it was a full room.
Yeah. So,
and those are no small rooms, by the way. I mean, those are in a movie theater, so those are like multiple
insane screens. Really nice.
That's the best. But so talking about dev containers, we've had April Yoho, formerly Edwards, at the .NET side, and she talked a little bit about dev containers as well. For those listening who might not necessarily know what it is, could you explain what dev containers is?
Oh yeah, I think I can take a stab at it. I think that dev containers is a technology that allows you to containerize your development environments. And it sounds like a really new thing, but essentially it is using container technology, being smart about what you put into a container image, so you can run containers with all your frameworks, runtimes, and other tools and things that you need already inside of it, described in a textual format. So it becomes easy to store, version, share, and then to start up. Being a container, it's a zero impact on your machine, and you can just run and work from a container with everything inside related to your current project, which could be many, right? It could be different projects, different versions of a product that you might be working on. So it tackles a lot of complexity and challenges in maintaining your development environment as part of your code base with a team and doing it in a smart way. So long explanation, but essentially it is take a clean laptop, make sure you have container technology on it, like Docker or Podman, clone a repository, which has this dev container definition inside of it, start up the container, and you're good to develop, which is actually what I tried to do in the session. I started a scenario where people were joining a team that is working on a distributed cloud application with Radius. But to do that, you need a Kubernetes cluster, you need Helm tooling. It also involved the Dapper, the distributed application runtime, which also has a CLI. It requires multiple tools, extensions, Visual Studio Code, if that's your IDE. And within a minute, I could have that running, and I showed that. But it was a bit baffling to some people. I heard later on that they said, "Okay, what were we looking at?" Because I didn't understand any of this Radius or Dapper or anything. But what I tried to explain was, this will get you going within the first half hour when you join a new project. Yes, you have a lot to learn of the things that you actually started in the dev container, maybe so. But it didn't require you to go through a full day of installing all these tools and prerequisites just to get going. And I think that's extremely powerful.
Yeah, and then especially, I think most people nowadays work from laptops, or even from home. They have laptops and they connect those to external devices to have bigger screens and that kind of stuff. But if you have just that laptop, or even if it's a PC, and you have to install everything for all code bases you work on that one machine, it tends to get a bit bloated probably. So I can also imagine that when you're working with Kubernetes and Helm and those kind of tooling, but then the next time you're working with something that does PDF rendering or OCR or whatever, it's nice to just have a container that's specifically suited to that specific task you're trying to do, and then just close it if you don't need it anymore, and keeping your hosting environment clean, right?
Yeah, I think also you in the past we used to have VM images even with a specific tool set for a legacy app that we're still maintaining, or versions, and it got better, but like versions of frameworks and stuff really was in our way for a long time. And this helps because it kind of has the same properties as infrastructure as code, right? Like because you're making a definition that you can also share.
Code, yeah.
So I think it's definitely helpful. And even if you're just in one project, it's also your documentation. What do you need for this? You can do more experimentation. And indeed, Alex, I think in the beginning of your talk, when you spin that up and you have like within 30 seconds all the ports open of a really complicated solution, it can be a bit baffling if you don't know all those tools. But it really shows that there's no long installations. There's no the setup is there. You can define everything because it starts to run and starts to communicate with each other, and that's really impressive for this technology.
Yeah, and especially, what you said is absolutely right, Oscar. Given multiple versions, you can make that part of your code base, so it evolves over time. And that means that if you go back to previous commits or maybe a different branch or whatever, you can find other versions, dev container definitions. And that means that you can have the tooling back a year ago. You can still use all of that, and more so simultaneously because of the container isolation. You can spin up multiple different versions of a dev container side by side to do your development on different versions of things as you go along. So that's also extremely powerful, I would say, to get the most out of it. And the small link you mentioned, code spaces, that you did a previous podcast or session on that. That's essentially running a dev container hosted by GitHub remotely, and then all you need is a modern browser, which makes the entry level even lower, because then you could do it from an iPad or anything.
You can get some coding in when you're on the couch and you're picking up your tablet.
Yeah, you're in a tablet, but basically you can also host like 16 cores and 64 gigs in the background or something. It's amazing to see that technology in work, but it also has some limitations, right? In the matter of tooling you use, because I think full Visual Studio is not an option at this moment.
Only for C++ projects.
Okay.
That's true. Yeah. So you kind of, I think that it boils down to NeoVim, Visual Studio Code, and Rider. I think that those are the most prominent options that are mostly mainstream. I haven't tried NeoVim yet, but I hear some people be enthusiastic about it. So that's something to try out.
Talking about Visual Studio Code, and then, as somebody has mentioned it previously, Visual Studio proper. But I love Visual Studio Code. Right, it's my default go-to if I just need to do something real quick. But also for web development and that kind of stuff, it's all pretty default. I go to code, but there are just, for me at least, solutions or projects or things I want to do that I just can't get right in Visual Studio Code, and then I need to open up Visual Studio, the big brother, let's say. Is that something that's similar to you guys, or am I completely the only one here?
Well, I was just thinking while you mentioned that, Rick. I thought, okay, most of the editors and tooling support is there by now, but I wasn't entirely sure if you move into something like graphical designers for Logic apps. I haven't tried it from Visual Studio Code, so it might be there, but there might be some areas where there might be not the full support just yet, or more textual-based support. So, like, for example. I'm going to say it anyway. Publish support from Visual Studio. Opinions vary whether that's a useful thing to use, but that's not in a graphical sense. Is that available from Visual Studio Code? So it's mostly textual and terminal based interaction that you get.
Yeah, the editor needs the IDE needs the split, right, between like the server side component, because that's really running remotely in the container. and the foreground which you're editing in it. So the design of Visual Studio proper, as you know, name it, Rick, is never intended and therefore problematic, I guess.
But also even when developing locally.
So I have the same thing for some things. For instance, somehow debugging is so in my muscle memory in full Visual Studio that every time I do it in code, I feel a bit limited. While I don't think there are any more limits. It's just me being really used to
being old
the environment
and saying I've always done it this way.
Oh crap! Okay, I'll delete it from my machine.
Well, I absolutely notice and I recognize what you're saying on, that you sometimes have this tendency to go back to Visual Studio because that's the full featured thing. I did force myself to work more from Visual Studio Code. And it turns out that if you do certain things and spend some time investigating, for example, how you can have multiple startup projects, that you need to do a bit more. And it's not supported out of the box with Visual Studio Code, but it's definitely possible to create launch profiles that have the similar experience to setting multiple startup projects. The same goes for... this is where tooling might be different for the SDKs and the extensions inside of Visual Studio 2022 is, let's say, pick something like a Docker Compose project. You don't have that notion inside of Visual Studio Code, as far as I know, at least. There's this new thing, the C# Dev Kit, that does give you the the understanding in Visual Studio Code of CS Proj and solution files. But the Docker Compose, for example, has good support and behind the scenes YAML file generation for hooking up the container in the debug or release mode. That as far as I know, is less prominent or not existing in Visual Studio Code. But you can still work your way around it and get a really nice development experience. And now you can see that there's even things shifting to more of it's a language-based development experience, even for compositions. There's something like .NET Aspire also takes a different approach. So some things might just disappear and be less necessary in the future.
Mm-hmm. I think that's in general the evolution of at least the Microsoft development technologies that are available. First of all, I like the fact that everything can now also be done through the CLI with the adding packages and building stuff and cleaning stuff. I sometimes even close my Visual Studio to do a decent clean and build command line because Visual Studio is just remembering stuff it shouldn't remember after a clean. So it's really nice that it's all terminal based. What you're actually saying about the changes that are now in the .NET realm in this case, I like the fact that we no longer need the main if we don't want it. I like the fact that we can have now a namespace with a semicolon and then lose some of the brackets that we have. And I like the fact that it's all becoming simpler and easier to use also for people outside of the .NET experience maybe at this point. Because
I think that was a starting point with .NET Core when we were like get a command line tool, make it a lot more like a lot of other really welcoming languages, like new languages. Opened up also the door for all kinds of tooling that could just work.
Yeah, and it also helps that your build and your deployment pipelines are now a lot easier because everything happens. Yeah, if it's Windows or Linux or we don't care, it just works, right?
I remember doing a Team Foundation server build machine with MS Build and making that was almost like black magic to make it work sometimes while it was just running on your machine.
And adding all of those capacities and making sure that the tools were installed and that kind of stuff.
Yeah, so looping back maybe as a final comment on dev containers, the nice thing, because everything is inside of that container image, it's also ideal for performing builds during a automated scenario, such as pipelines. Because you can just start up this dev container. You mentioned CLI, so that's what got me thinking. There's a dev container command line interface. that allows you to up a dev container and then work with it and make it run something like a make file. So it does all the work inside of the container. You extract the build artifacts and get rid of the container again. So you don't need to install all the tools in your pipeline runner, your host in what is it, Azure DevOps or GitHub Actions. You can just say, okay, all I need to install is the dev container CLI, and then go with it, because that's enough to get the dev containers running.
And then you need much less generic build agents, right? While that infrastructure, if you see it from Azure DevOps or GitHub, those are pretty beefy images with basically all the tools, all the modern tools installed. But if you need anything different or basically don't need much at all, you could do with a really specific image.
Yeah, that definitely so. And the other thing, referring back to command line interfaces, is that I see also a lot of benefit as a team to create tooling for yourself that is command line based. So you can use it to accelerate from scripts, bash scripts or PowerShell, and also use it from pipelines again. And there's the system command line NuGet package is a Microsoft created package. There's other ones like CLI framework, CLI FX is how it's written. There's the other one, system command, or command line parser. But there's many frameworks out there that help you build these terminal-based experiences. That can really be helpful by capturing the DevOps side of working with your code base, your running installation, and from a deployment and release scenario.
Now, you already touched upon Aspire a little bit. So .NET Aspire is a fairly new addition to the ecosystem. Again, for those presumably not aware of that service or that product, what does Aspire aspire to do?
Wow, nice one.
No, that was horrible. Sorry.
I think it's been done before.
Yeah, probably.
So what does it aspire to do? I think it tries to solve the problem of the orchestration and the complexity of distributed application, mainly for developers and development time. So what it does, it gives you templates and other things to get started quickly. It gives you tooling to make sure that an application that is distributed in nature, so consists of many running parts, that you can quickly get those orchestrations started and keep them running, and also all the dependencies that it has. So whether that's cloud-based dependencies, maybe local dependencies, again, leveraging container technology quite extensively, but not exclusively. It will help you do things that, for example, Docker Compose could also do, but now from a C# language. And it's much smarter about it, because Aspire also gives you things like connection management. So connection in the broader sense. How do I connect to my Redis cache or my database or my OpenAI instance? And also if you have multiple services running as part of your application, how do we do service discovery? So how can we find them? So how do we do URL management for HTTP endpoints, where you have a symbolic name instead of an IP address that you need to keep track of and that might be changing? So all these things are looped in there, and it also gives some service defaults. There's actually a project that you can add to your solution that is called service defaults, which brings common sense defaults for things like health checking, observability with OpenTelemetry, resilience patterns for connecting with things. So Poly is used under the covers for that to do some retry and back off patterns as an example. And they give you all that and a set of integrations that allow you to easily connect to things like a Redis cache, MongoDB. I mentioned Azure OpenAI, but it has also things like Kafka or key vaults, plenty of things that where they said, okay, we can give you a client-side thing to consume those sources, and we know how these SDKs work because to some extent we build them, and otherwise we just work with the creators of, for example, MongoDB to get the best practices hooking up to your dependent service. And also for the hosting side, because development time, you will be hosting that locally on your machine. And that means that you need to create this entire composition of your code running, other executables that might need to be running, and all these dependencies. So all of that is Aspire helps you start it up, tear it down, and they do smart things behind the covers.
Yeah, it's a very, well, on one hand, an opinionated way to set things up, but it helps you so much with the complexity of a distributed system. And it's funny, like I had someone in my team was like, should we use Aspire? It's like, well, most of the things it solved like took us like 5 years to get right. Like getting like indeed like all the integration as a developer that you can really go for everything like discovery and I don't know, even reverse proxying and going to some libraries to different connections and doing that locally and deploying to dev. Aspire really helps you to start running with that, and it has a solution for different dimensions. I like the fact that it's also so composable. So on one hand, it's pushing in, it's like, well, use OpenTelemetry, please. Makes sense these days, so start there. But if you want, you can also just use for local development the OpenTelemetry or the dashboard from Aspire to see what you're doing. And you can even ignore some of the other parts. Like I was interested at like a couple of years ago, they started with Project Thai. I don't know if you saw it back then. And it was so similar to something we built in-house back then for that orchestration problem. That it was, you see the evolution now. It's like, yeah, but if you do that, you also need indeed the direct, like how to do cache, how to go from local development to cloud. And Aspire basically makes you abstract that away just enough. I think it's really accomplishment in where they drew the line. Like it's not like we had, what was it, the previous frameworks that were like really all or nothing.
Yeah.
We had Service Fabric, of course, which was pretty big investment and not easy to switch to. I think Aspire, just pick and choose the parts that make sense to you and grow into it is a possibility.
Yeah, and I think it's reasonably low impact because the integrations that I mentioned, they have a client side part where it's your ASP.NET Core Web API wants to connect to a Kafka stream, for example. They give you this Aspire NuGet package that does the integration to Kafka for you. But if you look inside, it's using the original Kafka SDKs with some code to hook it up in the right way to get all the telemetry, health checks, and other things going. So you don't have to learn all of that. You could get rid of it and just even copy paste the code that they use to bootstrap it, and then you aren't tied to these Aspire client packages anymore, the integrations. And on the hosting side, everything is isolated in a separate project that's called AppHost. And AppHost doesn't travel to any environment beyond, let's say, development or maybe a little bit after, but it definitely does not exist in production. So you can't have any ties there because no project takes dependency on the AppHost, which makes it also pretty clean in the sense that you will only find this in the environments that you consider to be development, which could be test or whatever. That you can stretch it definitely, but it's in that sense, it's not a lock-in. It's an add-on that you can get rid of and should get rid of in production.
Do you know what time it is?
Is it time for a totally random question?
It's time for totally random question. Alex, what is the most unexpected use of technology you have encountered recently?
All right. Okay. Let me think.
Sometimes people just add tech. It seems like for the sake of adding tech, because it just doesn't add anything except for maybe complexity or.
And so is this in a real world scenario or in a professional case?
Your choice. It's what
my
you have
choice.
encountered. Your choice.
Oh, I'm a bit baffled, but I
can imagine.
so
it's totally random, man.
Yeah, it is, man.
I know. So I'll buy myself some time by started talking on what I sometimes see happen, and I'm like, okay, so I as an architect, I really believe in the fit for purpose mantra. So if you use something, it should be intended for that purpose and not for something else. And I've encountered a lot of situations where it's like, well, it's not supposed to be used like this, but it works, right? So it can do that. And there's so frameworks that are being used, and like, why would you want to use this framework in this situation? Because that's not what it's supposed to. Yeah, but it does have a command line, so we can use the command line. I'm like, yes, but
Why would you ever do this?
Why would you ever do this? So for me, then I immediately get these. In Dutch, the series is called Buurman and Buurman. Pat and Matt in English.
Ayato.
Ayato, yes. Those two neighbors do that a lot of times, right? So they also start stacking up those things on top of each other. So they want to polish the floor in their house, but they make a mistake, and all of a sudden they end up with all the doors and closets in the house are removed because they need the wood for the floor, and but they say, okay, but it works, right? So that's what I need to think of tech being used in a way that it's not supposed to be used.
You definitely see some people going into a path, and because of they spend some time there, like, let's continue and solve all kinds of issues you shouldn't even have.
Yeah, workaround upon workaround upon workaround, and that's what brings the comparison to Pat and Matt, which is essentially what they do in every episode. It gets worse every step they take.
Yeah. Well, basically, this also, like, you really triggered something in me now. Like, I'm thinking, like, my answer now would be, crypto for paying.
To buy your pizza with crypto, right?
It's like, it feels a bit like that, right? Well, like, we're using the GPUs for something else these days.
Yeah, yes, that is true. That is true. Okay, so going back to tech just a little bit more, and I think Oscar already mentioned it, is OpenTelemetry, and the fact that OpenTelemetry is now also supported on Azure and in all Microsoft technology. We even have the possibility of having Application Insights do OpenTelemetry now instead of its own proprietary solution. Why is this a good thing, Alex?
Oh, yes. Oh, okay. Well, I think that OpenTelemetry enables you to do implement proper instrumentation to have your solutions, your applications be more observable, which again is a good thing if you want to do a DevOps mindset towards your development lifecycle. So meaning if you build your application and you also make sure that it runs properly, then you want to know, how is my application doing? And you can only do so if you have instrumentation in place. Traditionally, that involved mostly logging. People would log extensively in their applications to get a feel of what is it doing. What OpenTelemetry does, and it actually started on the other end, it says, okay, we have tracing and metrics as two signals of observability. And they added later on, the third one was logging, because a lot of people were missing the logging part. But I think with tracing and metrics, you actually cover a lot of the scenarios that you want to have. So for example, tracing allows you to see the flow of the application, but while capturing this flow from one part of your code base to another part, to another physical part, so distributed applications, you can even add specific events, which corresponds mostly with logging. So those things are defined in OpenTelemetry. Also the metrics, which give you more of a number-like state of how is your application doing. And they standardize it. They have an OpenTelemetry protocol for transmission. They have schemas for the payloads and the data that they transfer. They have an application interface that defines what this all looks like from more of a code and developer perspective, and many software development kits for various languages and platforms. So Rust, Ruby, C++, Java, .NET, a lot of things. So it's OpenTelemetry is good because it doesn't tie you to a particular language or framework. It is cross-platform, multiple support, standardized, gaining a lot of traction. So it's a safe bet at this moment, and pretty mature. And you want this, you really, really want this. So that's why it's also good.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things that always comes up when customers ask me, "Hey, we want to know how to provision our application on Azure. We want to know which level of or which queue or tier on a SQL database we need. We want to know how to calculate what type of cost we're going to get once we start moving towards Azure." Then the first question always is, "What's your application doing now? How is it using the current infrastructure that it has? How are the resources being used?" And if that's something that you can't answer, then it's almost impossible to find either possibilities of moving to other types of hosting, but also to identify problems in your application. I mean, if you don't know how it's acting and reacting, then how would you know where issues might lie, right?
Oh yeah, definitely. And sometimes it's even as subtle as you release a new version of your application and all the tests show up green, and so you release the new functionality. And then you get calls from customers saying, what is going on? The site is so slow or whatever. So even though every unit test and all the other tests were in the green, and maybe even your load tests or other tests seem to do the right thing, it might just be that for some reason with certain input in your application that it starts behaving in a different way than expected, because there's a weird regular expression that all of a sudden takes a lot of CPU. And you see that your application starts degrading during production. But finding that out and finding where the bottleneck is a really daunting task on a production environment, especially if can't just attach a debugger to find out where it is.
Let me put a breakpoint.
We all did that once.
Yeah, and then what you see is that some teams because they really need to solve this, they resort to doing what I think is sometimes dubbed as a poor man's debugging. Is just sprinkling a lot of logging everywhere, so they can see, okay, we reached this log line, so at least we hit that point. And I think that with tracing, you have a much better means of doing that. And myself, I'm mostly in the Microsoft space, so my go-to framework and development platform is .NET. And you see that the primitives that are being used on that platform that are then picked up by OpenTelemetry libraries and the SDK allow you for a really strong use of this instrumentation. So to make it a little bit more specific, if you want to work with tracing in .NET, you have this thing called the activity. And the activity is what travels with you across threads and is being recreated even across other instances of your application. So jumping from the front end to a web API, activities on the other end can be reinstantiated with a new parent that connects back to, and so on. So there's a lot of things that are in the .NET platform that are not library specific, but actual .NET core libraries that you can leverage in that way. And so that's one thing. And for metrics, they have instruments and meters which do the same thing. So it's not connected to OpenTelemetry at all. But you can add the OpenTelemetry libraries, say, we want to activate them, listen to these trace sources, for example, or activity sources, listen to these instruments, and it picks it up. So you even get rid of OpenTelemetry if it's not to your liking. If you want something like application insights instead, it leans on the same primitives.
And that's where it becomes powerful. And just like you said, you can now in one generic way monitor and observe across multiple technologies, across multiple hosting types, and it all boils down to that one type of that one suite of metrics and traces and that kind of information that allow you to get insight and gain insight into what your application ecosystem is doing.
Yeah, and the nice thing, of course, we needed a standard like this because the problem is the same everywhere. But if you look, I don't know, 10, 12 years back, we had basically an agent or an SDK for every provider that did some application monitoring. And you had all kinds of logging frameworks, but they're all attached inside. And we went from that period into more distributed applications. And I think without actual observability like we have right now, like that, those beasts become really hard to tame in production. I saw like a couple of weeks ago, there was like a downstream SDK changed, like some Microsoft SDK, and it had a slightly different way of doing DI. And the IOs exploded in production on that. Like you wouldn't know where this is coming from if you didn't have something like a good observability. And in that case, had still native app insights running. It also kind of does the same thing, of course. But it's without that, like at some point your answer will be just scale extra resources because we don't know.
Yeah.
While you're wasting time and memory and IO in a lot of cases.
And this is exactly the case for why you would want to have instrumentation, and you don't have to use OpenTelemetry for that, but you can make a pretty good case to switch to that because it's vendor and platform agnostic. So you're not tied to any commercial product just yet. You can still use them. And Rick, like you mentioned, Azure now has the OpenTelemetry support. So this is a Microsoft specific thing that gives you extras. Might get back to that later on, but even if in a landscape where you have maybe older applications that don't do OpenTelemetry, since OpenTelemetry is this open standard, you can do smart things of transforming older telemetry signals into the newer standardized one based on OpenTelemetry. And nearly every APM tool, so application performance monitoring tool, is now offering ingest of OpenTelemetry signals. So on the far end, you can pick any tool that you would like to have. If it's a Datadog, Application Insights, or Azure Monitor, or pick your thing that you are currently using, or switch to one that you think is the best fit for your situation. But with OpenTelemetry as a conduit in between, you can actually have that be a collecting part for your landscape. And they even have an OpenTelemetry collector that has multiple inputs from various sources and can output to OpenTelemetry signals, but also older signals, such as Zipkin, for example. That's also something that you can do. So you have this switch box in the middle, this universal translator kind of thing that allows you to ingest multiple signals, standardize them, and output them in either OpenTelemetry or some others, which gives you some flexibility for transition periods or maybe some other reasons in your architecture and landscape that you need to support more than just OpenTelemetry. So I think that's extremely powerful in terms of, where we're moving into this age where we need observable applications. And this will definitely be like smoothing the experience and the transition.
Yeah, but imagine like you're fall into one of the APMs indeed, and you have all the clients installed, and then someone's like, should we move to something else because it's better? Like with at this moment with OpenTelemetry, you could just plug them in parallel, run for a month, see what it costs, see what it does for us, and decide to switch. Some abstractions are perfect to have, of course. Like this is so generic, and I think it's we're mature enough to know what we want now, and OpenTelemetry defined that now in a standard. And of course, like in some places, I'm using App Insights for more than a decade right now in all kinds of projects. So in the beginning, it's like, okay, but what does it bring me? At least that pluggability, at least that future decision. And what I really like is that if nothing is observing in your setup, so you have nothing listening or hooked up to the source, it's actually also just stopping or not executing all the logic that you plugged into it. So if you're running it blindly because of performance or whatever, or sampling, it's not wasting time or compute at that moment.
Yeah.
We started out today by saying we have a fairly young industry. I think, but it's true, right? And I think if we look at the different topics that we've discussed today, with dev containers, with the OpenTelemetry that we're talking about now, with all of the added value that a framework like .NET Aspire brings us, I think we're seeing that our industry is maturing and is evolving. And where it used to be just the newest version of a development framework or whatever, we are now helping ourselves be more productive and build better software. And I think that's a nice thought to round this episode up with. Alex, is there anything that we've discussed that you want to get back to, or maybe something that you would like to add because you think we definitely need to know that?
No, I think I hope that people, if they are interested in any of the topics that we touched, I always say, go spend 15 or 30 minutes looking into it, because I think that the things that we covered today are really cool and interesting, and will help you do more or improve, at least learn something new. So I think that I would end with that. Don't just stop after hearing all this and go back to work, but spend some time, pick the one or two things that you were like, ooh, this sounds cool, and start exploring and using it, because I think you'll thank yourself later for taking that step. They are game changers in my book.
Great shout, and we'll make sure to add links in the description for all the different topics that we've touched on. Alex, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Alex.
Yes, thank you as well, and it was a pleasure to be here. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to Beta Talks, the podcast. Beta Talks is made possible by BetaBit Managed Software Development.
See you next time.
Bye.